Welcome to our 76 Capital Leadership Series. My name is Wayne Kimmel, Managing Partner of 76 Capital, and really excited to have a great guest on our show today. We have the legendary David Falk, the super agent to incredible people like Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing and Alonzo Mourning and Dikembe Mutombo and so many others, including coaches like John Thompson, as well as Mike Krzyzewski. And he's truly the mastermind behind the Jordan brand. Excited to talk with him about all the things that are happening within what he's done over the years, as well as what's happening in the NBA and basketball in general today. What we typically do on our 76 Capital show is we talk with leaders like David, who are really have moved the game forward in many sports, and as well as agents and leaders and other entrepreneurs in and around the sports industry. And it's been a great show for all of us. You can find all the shows, all the content, all the things that we've done on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. And of course, you can subscribe to our 76 Capital YouTube channel and get all of our shows, every single one of them that we've done on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. So I'm Wayne Kimmel. You can find me on Twitter as well as on all the other social networks at Wayne Kimmel. And we are just really excited to bring on, super agent David Falk as our guest for this show. David, welcome to the 76 Capital Leadership Series.
Thanks so much for having me, Wayne.
Yeah, really excited to have you and talk with you about all the incredible things that you've done. One of the things that we do on our leadership series is we like to go back to the beginning with our guests and really talk about, where they grew up, who were some of the influences in their lives that helped get them to where they are today. So I'd love to start with you and just talk about, where you grew up and some of the experiences that you had in your life.
I grew up in a small town on the south shore of Long Island called Seaford. And I went to school in Levittown, Long Island, which was the first planned community in the United States that was built by William Levitt in the late 1940s for the returning soldiers from World War II. The houses cost $5,300 a piece.
Wow.
It was a very sort of blue collar community. So my father, who never graduated high school, was a butcher. I owned a couple of retail butcher shops. My mother was quite the opposite. She was extremely highly educated. She had 2 bachelor's degrees, and she was truly my life's mentor. So I grew up in a home where my father stressed education because he didn't have it. My mother stressed education because it was her life's work. And when I was very, very young, I always aspired to be a lawyer. I really can't say why. I didn't know anyone who was a lawyer, but it was sort of my aspiration. As I got through my teens, I developed a very, very keen interest in sports. And I had this sort of romantic notion that perhaps, I could be able to combine a career in law with a career in sports. I got to college at Syracuse University, and the very first day of school, on my dorm floor were the 2-star basketball recruits, Greg, the Kid Coles, who was the 6th leading scorer in the country my senior year, and Paul Petrowski from Utica. And we became like best friends from day one. And this sort of romantic notion of being an agent accelerated until I got to be a senior and realized that I had no clue how to help either guy. Greg actually got drafted, and so I went off to law school.
And then you went to law school at George Washington, I saw, which is where my dad went. And just like you, I was always was going to be a lawyer. That was my plan, right? And I did, but it's one of those things but it was like, what else? It was be a lawyer and something else, right?
Exactly.
And so what was when you were studying law at George Washington, did you start to get involved in the sports world at that point, or were you just really focused on your studies at that point?
No, I started doing what wasn't even called networking back then, but I started networking, and I met just through different connections. The first gentleman I met was in Boston, a guy named Phil McLaughlin, who was a financial planner for a lot of the Celtics, including Red Auerbach. Terrific man. He in turn introduced me to a friend of his who had a friend named Larry Fleischer, who was the founder of the NBA Players Association and by far the most powerful, successful agent at the time. And to put in perspective for your listeners, this is 1972, 73. The agent business had literally just started in sports. It's generally credited that Mark McCormick of IMG founded the business. He started off with his first 3 clients, Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, and Gary Player. Not a bad way to start. And most of the people that I met were sole practitioners. They weren't hiring people. There were no SFXs. There were no Wassermans. There were no Octagons at the time other than IMG. And so I went from what everyone told me, nice to meet you. We're really not hiring anybody. But if you go to school in Washington, there's a gentleman in Washington, a lawyer named Donald Dell, who's the Davis Cup captain, and you should see him. And so I met, in Washington, I met the head lawyer for the NFL, a guy named Hamilton Carruthers, who had a young associate working for him named Paul Tagliabue, became the commissioner of the league. I met the Lord Allen Porter that helped baseball. And everyone said, thanks a million, we're not hiring, or you don't have the credentials for us to hire you, like at Covington. And so finally, I tried to meet Donald L. And I would say in my entire life, I've met many presidents numerous times. I've never had more difficulty meeting an individual than meeting Donald L. And I guess the lesson is, if you really want something bad enough, you got to swallow your pride and just, go for the gusto. And so one day, after hearing weeks and weeks of every excuse that executive could give for not taking a phone call, he's at lunch, he's out of town, he's in a meeting with a client, he's in the bathroom, whatever. I went to the law library, which is probably the only time in my career I ever visited the law library. And back then, they had pay phones, no cell phones. They were a quarter to make a call. I brought a lot of quarters, and every 10 minutes, I would call Donald Dell's office. And when he finally ran out of excuses with the secretary, he finally agreed to give me an interview. I was working for a law firm at the time called Sidley & Austin in my second year of law school, big Chicago regulatory firm. I took off for lunch. Donald kept me waiting 3.5 hours in the lobby before he finally met me. And I can remember like it was yesterday. I walked into his office, and one of these old-fashioned phones that have the lights blinking. Every line has a light, and the lights are going off like a runway at the airport. And in the middle of waiting for him, Stan Smith, who's the #1 tennis player in the world that year, calls him to tell him he's going to go skiing during his off week. And Donald goes absolutely nuclear on Smith and screaming at him. And I said, oh my God, how could you possibly be screaming at the #1 player in the world? So when he finally calmed down and got off the phone, we had a brief interview. There they are. He told me they weren't hiring people with my credentials. My background at Syracuse University and GW Law School didn't exactly blow him over. And so I told him, look, hey, no problem. I'll work for you for free. I just want the experience. And I guess that was sort of like the Godfather offer, an offer too good to turn down. So in the summer of my second year of law school, I literally started working for Donald on May 25th, 1974. I got married a week later. I had a full-time job at Sidley & Austin until 6 every evening. I went to summer school one night a week and take, of all courses, a course of negotiations. And from 6 to 11, I worked at ProServe for free. And at the end of the summer, to reward me for my diligence, Donald gave me a part-time clerkship for $5 an hour. $5 an hour as a lawyer. And the law school allowed you to work 20 hours a week and be a full-time student. And I'd say I averaged about 80 hours a week. I basically didn't go to school my third year. I took my exams, did what I needed to do, pass, and tried to prove that I was worthy of becoming, a full-time associate at the firm. And Donald didn't hire me till a week after graduation. I applied to jobs in the government, law firms, and this is what I had my heart set on. And finally, a week after graduation, he finally hired me. He took me out to lunch. You have to understand, Donald operates on his own time schedule. So to me, lunch is like 12, 12:30, 1, maybe 1:30 if you're running late. I had finished. I was so excited for this meeting because this could be whether I find out if I have a job. And finally at 4 o'clock, he says, come on, let's go to lunch. I said, I'm sorry to keep you waiting, And we go to this little hamburger joint around the corner. And he says, look, you really worked hard. We'd like to offer you an associate's job. It was a law firm called Dell, Craig Hill, Fentress & Benton. And he said, we'd like to start you off at $13,000 a year, which is less than all the secretaries are making. I said, Don, look, I'm really grateful for the offer. I'm not sure how much you keep up on this, but like starting lawyers, even in the government, which is the lowest paying job for a lawyer, are making $18,000. And he said, really? I had no idea it was that high. Well, starting associates at Dell Craig will make $13,000. And there was only one, and it was me. So drawing on all my experience, having worked at the firm almost a year and a half now, we had a discussion about my salary and we compromised, and I started at $13,000. And it never got a lot better than that. I was there for 17 years before I finally went on my own. But it was a great learning experience for me. And while I disagreed with a lot of the ways that Donald managed the company, I will always be grateful for him for giving me my start.
Well, David, that's an amazing story, and so happy to have you on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. What we talk about on this series is, what it really takes to be a leader, a business person, an entrepreneur. And what you just described, the type of persistence and drive and desire that you wanted to be an agent and work for Donald. I mean, that's incredible advice that you just gave to all of our viewers. Really appreciate that.
I think in any walk of life, whether you're like, I've managed athletes for my entire career. A lot of your viewers probably saw Michael's documentary, The Last Dance, which was amazing. And you saw the incredible drive he had. Now, he knew when he hired me that I wasn't very good at shooting a jumper or making a pass, but I think he saw in me a level of drive and competitiveness in my field that he could relate to in his field. I think that's one of the things that bonded us and bonded me with John Thompson or Patrick Ewing, Coach K, any of these people that are incredibly successful. But you have to find a way to do it within your own personality. I teach negotiations, and it always amuses me when you have these courses and these books people write about negotiations, including The Art of the Deal. And to me, you have to have your own style. You can't borrow someone else's style. That's acting. If you want to be in a movie and play the role of an agent, you want to be Jerry Maguire, that's cool. But day to day, if you're working with people every day, if you're working with the same owners, if you're dealing with the Sixers owners, Josh Harrison, Dave Blitzer, whether you're negotiating for Elton Brand or Evan Turner, whoever you have to be consistent so they could know what to expect from you. And if you say, I think this player is worth X, they have to know, what does that mean? Does that mean it's half of what you're saying? Does it mean all of what you're saying? And so I think that, it's interesting to hear stories of leaders. I'm, myself love listening to people's stories, success stories. But at the end of the day, each person has to find their own path, their own tempo, their own way of doing things that works for them. And so I get a lot of young students who call me like 400 times and say, Mr. Falk, I know you did this with Donald Dell. And I said, yeah, that was like 40 years ago. Try something new like that. That worked 40 years ago for me. Not necessarily going to work consistently for you. So I think you have to individualize and personal. Just like in your business, you have a lot of different clients and they all have different needs. They have different approaches to dealing with you. You can't treat John Thompson, who's one of my life's mentors. I say this very proudly. Other than my mother, who's clearly my life mentor, John has probably influenced me more than any man that I've ever met in my life. I love the man. And he has a million expressions that I borrow. I don't want to say I steal them, just borrow them. And one of them is, I don't run a democracy. I don't treat everyone the same. I treat everyone fairly. But if anyone thinks that I'm going to treat Allen Iverson the same way I'm going to treat the number 14 walk-on at Georgetown, you're crazy. Any more than when he played for the Celtics, that he would expect Red Auerbach to treat him like he treated Bill Russell, who was maybe one of the greatest players in NBA history. And so I think in every business, if you want to be an effective leader, you have to learn to treat people fairly, but to be able to personalize and individualize your approach, because people have different needs.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. And I think, one of the things that we talk about a lot on our 76 Capital Leadership Series, I've talked about in my book, we talk about with all the entrepreneurs is developing, relationships, and actually really figuring out specifically what that, that specific person and what they're all about. And because again, as you said, it's not the same for everybody. And so, working with Michael Jordan, how did you develop that relationship and develop that level of trust that the two of you have to be able to have, it's unique that you've, with a lot of your clients, that you've had them for life, basically. How did you develop that relationship with them?
Well, it's interesting. I told him when we first got together in 1984, my advice to him was, do not trust me simply because you put your name on a contract and said, you're my guy. Let me earn your trust so that it means something. It means more than just, a signature line. And I think over the first 3 or 4 years, we went through different challenges. Some of them were needs that he had or advice that he needed. Some of them were, interestingly, were things that happened within my company. So for example, Donald Dell, who's a tennis guy, and came up with the idea of having Michael play Magic Johnson in a one-on-one game, winner take all, for $1 million. It's very similar to like a challenge match in tennis. He tried to borrow. It was an interesting idea. I didn't really think much about it. Called Michael one day and mentioned it to him. He was probably 24 years old. And without even thinking, he comes right back and said, David, there's zero chance that I'm going to do that. And I can't even believe you'd ask me to do that. And I said, really, why? And he said, everybody thinks that I'm the ultimate one-on-one player, that my style is not conducive to winning a championship. Whereas Magic Johnson is the ultimate team player, and he's won 2 or 3 championships both in college and in the Lakers. And so if I play him one-on-one and win, everyone's gonna say, well, big deal. That's who Michael Jordan is the ultimate one-on-one player. And for some reason, if I lose, then he has the championships and the one-on-one crown. What's the upside for me? I don't want to do it. I said, wow, I wish I was smart enough to have thought of that myself before I asked him, and I wouldn't have asked him. So I go back to Donald and I say, Donald, look, Michael doesn't want to do it. And he said, David, you're his guy. You've got to make him do it. This is a great opportunity for the firm. I said, Donald, I'm not going to even ask him to do it again. He doesn't want to do it. And he's right. This is not a good thing for Michael Jordan. And he said, really? Well, let me ask you a question. Who are you working for? Are you working for ProServe, or are you working for Michael Jordan? And I said to Donald, the day that Michael Jordan doesn't think that I'm working for Michael Jordan, he's going to fire ProServe. And I think those kinds of decisions, and I'm not taking credit for it, it's what you have to do. That player's got to know that you've got his back, that you don't have a conflict of interest. You're not going to recommend things to him that are good for you and not good for him, or he'll never stay with you. And one of the things that I'm most proud of, most appreciative for to Michael, is his loyalty. He's an amazingly loyal person. And I went from ProServe to Fame to SFX to Clear Channel, and he stood with me his entire career. And he could have had anybody. I mean, this is Michael Jordan, probably the most popular, successful athlete in history. He could have had a big Hollywood agency represent him. He could have had a big PR agency represent him. He could have had a law firm, or could have had anyone he wanted to represent him. And the fact that he stood with me meant everything to me. And I wanted his loyalty, as much as you want to do a great job for a person of that stature, his loyalty made me want to do twice as good a job, because I was just so damn appreciative of how much trust he put in me. But I had to earn it. And I tell all the players that signing a piece of paper doesn't mean you trust a person. What it means is that that person has a good track record with other players, which is why you picked him or her. But when they're working with you, they've got to prove themselves to you. What I did for James Worthy, or what I did for Phil Ford from Carolina before Michael came out, is the reason that he picked us. But it's not a guarantee that it's going to work for him. And so when you earn that trust, then it's really meaningful. I don't believe that people in business who are just amazing personalities just feel like you bottle them in the first second. It's too easy. Maybe it doesn't last. It's ephemeral. I think that when you go through tough times with your clients, whether you go through an economic turn down like 2008 or the pandemic we're going through now, it's those tough times when you perform that the players really know. They really know that you care.
Yeah, incredible. We have an amazing guest, David Falk, super agent across so many different generations of players through the NBA and many other sports on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. David, really appreciate you having you on the show. You talk about the things that you've done with Michael Jordan, and certainly one of the biggest things that you did with him was creating the Jordan brand. And I'd love to hear how that all came together, and how you created it, and how Air Jordan came about, and just how that's actually been able to last, and not only just last, but extend for so many years now, and still be such a strong brand across the United States as well as the world.
Well, you showed a picture earlier of Stan Smith and Arthur Ashe. So when I started out at ProServe full-time, one of my first assignments, I was sort of the junior agent. I wasn't the senior agent. My job was to manage their schedules. They had a lot of appearances for their companies. You see Arthur Ashe is wearing the Coq Sportif, which is a division of Adidas. Stan's wearing Adidas tracksuit. He had the famous Stan Smith shoes with Adidas. Arthur had his own line of, all the tennis players had their own lines of rackets, shoes, and clothes. They represented resort clubs. Stan's been with Hilton Head Sea Pines Plantation for 50 years. Arthur was the touring pro for the Doral. It was owned by a dear friend of his named Al Schragus. And my job, in addition to doing the schedules, was to track their royalty payments on their products. So every 6 months we get a statement from Adidas or Head Ski Company, and I would literally track the royalty payments. Oftentimes there were mistakes. And so I gravitated to basketball because I had no background in tennis. I wasn't the Davis Cup captain. I played tennis, not very well. And my true love was basketball and football. I was a team sport guy, sort of emblematic of my background in a blue-collar community. My parents didn't belong to a country club. I didn't know what a country club was when I was growing up. And so in the first 5 years of my career, as I was trying to find my own niche in a very established firm, Donald Dell and Frank Kragle, the two senior partners, had very, very strong relationship with a gentleman named Horst Dassler, whose father, Adi Dassler, founded Adidas, which is, we mispronounced it American, call it Adidas. It's really pronounced Adidas. Lee Fentress, who's the third partner, had a strong relationship with Converse. So I knew I wasn't going to make any impact in those companies. And so over the first 5 years, I was looking to forge my own relationships where I would be the principal player. And I found this tiny little company in Beaverton, Oregon called Nike. And Nike had a guy in exactly the same situation as I was in. He was a lawyer named Rob Strasser. He was like the number 3 guy in the company to Phil Knight. And he and I just developed a very special relationship. Actually, the first 5 deals I offered him, he turned me down. And I said, I'm going to offer you one more. And if you say no, you'll never hear from me again. And the 6th one was magic. And it started a whole chain of players. And Strasser had this amazingly humorous habit. Whenever he closed the deal, we'd shake hands and he'd say to me, am I getting effed? And I said, relax, this is a great deal for you. And so in January of 1984, I used to go to Nike 3 or 4 times a year just to maintain my relationships, check in with Strasser, hopefully see Phil Knight. Phil would from time to time would bounce in and have an idea. Like one day he said to me, David, you have all these players. Why can't we sign Moses Malone to the Sixers? I said, well, because you can't sign him because you turned me down when I offered it to you. He said, we did? I said, yeah. He said, God, what would it take to sign him? And now back then, guys were making $25,000. I said, it probably cost you $100 to sign Moses. He said, you got it. If you can get him to us, we'll pay him $100. But anyway, Strasser was my principal guy. And so I'm up there in January of '84. I just signed my first quarterback ever, Boomer Esiason, and I said to Strasser, this is your kind of guy. He's a 6'5", blonde-haired, blue-eyed, really good-looking guy from New York. He's got a personality sort of like McEnroe. He's very, very outgoing, and you love him. So he says, like, okay, what do you think it'll cost to sign him? I said, like $25,000 a year for 2 years. He says, shake hands. Okay, you got a deal. We go to lunch. There he is, the Boom. Boomer's the godfather of my first daughter, of my younger daughter.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, we love Boomer. You had Frank Reich as well.
Exactly.
All your Maryland guys. I'm a Maryland alum. It's really, really, really great to see that as well.
No, he's an amazing person. He's raised about $100 million for cystic fibrosis because his son Gunnar. Anyway, so we go to lunch after agreeing to the deal for Boomer, and Strasser says to me, "Gosh, David, I forgot to ask you. This guy Boomer, is he a guard or a forward?" I said, "Rob, the guy's a quarterback." Oh, he goes, "God, am I getting F?" I said, "Relax. Guys could be great." Boomer took the Bengals to the Super Bowl, I think, at 88. He was a terrific quarterback, played a long time, very successful broadcaster. So at that visit, after we got over the Boomer episode, Strasser says to me, you have a really close relationship with both Georgetown and North Carolina. And there's two players that were really interested at those schools, Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing. And I went like, duh. Patrick Ewing is probably the most impactful guy to come into college basketball since Jabbar, in 1966. This is 1984. And Michael Jordan already had been voted the National Player of the Year as a sophomore. So like saying you're interested in those guys would be like me calling up Nike last spring and saying, there's this guy at Duke you might not have ever heard of named Zion Williamson. I really think he's got a good chance to be a first-round pick. You guys should go after him. Or calling up in 2003 and saying, hey, there's this high school player in Akron you might not never heard of named LeBron James. I really think that he's got a good chance to, be a good player in the NBA. I mean, say you are interested in Jordan and Ewing is like a complete no-brainer. And so it amuses me, all the people that want to take credit, for telling Nike to Sonny Vaccaro, who's a character, who really had a great deal to do with Nike signing coaches. That was his contribution. He takes credit for telling Nike to sign Jordan. Actually takes credit for negotiating a deal, but I never discussed the deal with Sonny. I never discussed any deal with Sonny in the whole time he was at Nike. And George Ravling, who's a very dear friend, was the assistant coach of the Olympic team when Michael played in '84. He takes credit. But the truth is, when I asked Michael to go visit Nike along with Adidas, Converse, Spot Belt, and a bunch of different companies, he didn't want to get on the plane. As they showed in The Last Dance, he said, look, David, the Olympics have been grueling, playing for Coach Knight, been a long season. I want to be with Adidas. Just you guys are close with Adidas. Tee it up for me with Adidas. I am not getting on a plane and flying 7 hours to Portland, Oregon to see Nike. And so that's why I'm so amused by Sonny and George taking credit. They're both, basketball people. It's like having a great recruit and you can't even get him to visit Maryland. You're trying to sign Boomer as the quarterback and you ask him to take a campus visit. Nah, I don't think I want to visit Maryland, not my kind of place. So I told Strasser early on. Now, let me just back up half a step. In 1982, we represented James Worthy, also from North Carolina, Michael's teammate, who was the MVP when Carolina beat Georgetown at the Superdome for the national title by 1 point when Fred Brown threw the ball away to James Worthy. And James is the only player in NBA history, Wayne, the only one to be drafted number one in the draft by a team that had just won the NBA championship because of a trade. And so when he got drafted by the Lakers on a great team with Magic and Kareem, I told all the shoe companies, we're not going to make offers for James Worthy. You have to make me an offer, and I will accept offers that start in six figures. Now, you have to understand, in 1982, there was only one player in the entire league who was making six figures, whose name was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Bird wasn't making six figures. Magic on his own team wasn't making six figures. Moses had not yet done the deal with Nike. And they said, David, you must be out of your mind. No one's going to pay a rookie six figures, to wear a basketball shoe. I said, hey, no problem. If you don't think he's worth it, don't make an offer. So at the end of the summer, we signed James with New Balance for 8 years for $1.2 million, $150,000 a year. And the next player to come out that I signed was Michael Jordan. And for Michael, he's the National Player of the Year, won a gold medal in the Olympic team. He has this amazingly exciting style of play. Nobody, including Coach Smith and his parents, had a clue that he'd become the GOAT. No one. Because, the running joke at Carolina for years was that the only person in history that ever kept Michael Jordan to 20 points a game was Dean Smith. Because in his system, he preached teamwork. And as great as Michael was, he didn't really show in college on a consistent basis what he showed the first day he showed up in the NBA in Chicago. And so I told the companies for Michael, I used the famous quote from Kennedy, ask not what America could do for you, but what you could do for America. I said, I know what Michael Jordan can do to energize your company. And what I want to know is if you sign him, what will you do to promote him? And Converse said, we'll do exactly what we're doing for Magic Johnson and Kareem. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Dr. J, which was nothing. They didn't have their own shoes. They didn't have one commercial in 1984, not one. So that wasn't very appealing. Adidas, who we were very close to, the owner of Adidas had just died, and the company was somewhat in disarray. And the international head of marketing, John Bolter, who I knew extremely well, said to me, look, we really appreciate Michael's loyalty and desire to be with us. We just can't make it work. We're just too disorganized right now to make that kind of financial commitment and execute it. And so I said to Nike, if you want to sign Jordan, I want you to treat him as if he were a tennis player. And Strasser said, what does that mean? So what it means is I want him to have his own line of shoes, his own line of clothes, and I want you to promote him, not as a team athlete, but like as an individual athlete. So we discussed the financial parameters of the deal. It was over $1 million a year. And in addition to what they paid him, I made Nike spend $1 million promoting Michael the first 6 months in the NBA, which today would be like $100 million. So he came to Washington to try to close the deal in late August. It was Washington in August is 95 degrees, 99% humidity, and in the weekends they turned off the air conditioning in an office building. So we're sitting in my office roasting. Strasser's about 6'3". He looks like John Madden, about 350 pounds, and he's literally just dripping, Wayne. And he said, okay, we may be willing to give you what you want. The money's not a problem. We may be willing to give you a line of shoes and clothes, which in our industry is either called a signature line because the player signs it on the shoe, or an autograph line. That's what it's called. You have an autograph racket. If you have the Arthur Ashe head racket, his signature's on the racket. If you have the Stan Smith Adidas shoe, his signature's on the shoe. So that's what it's called. So he said to me, if we give you this line, what do you want to call it? And I looked at him like he could not be that dumb. I said, what do I want to call it? I want to call it Michael Jordan. That's his name. It's an autograph line. I want to call it Michael Jordan. He said, no, we are not going to call it Michael Jordan. I said, really? Like, why not? And he said, David, no one is going to believe that a 21-year-old basketball player who just left school a year early is going to be sitting in his apartment in Northbrook, Illinois at night, designing shoes and clothes. It has no credibility. So we're not going to call it Michael Jordan. And when I heard that, I literally wanted to strangle him. So I said, okay, big time. What do you want to call it? Ha ha. He goes, we'll give you a line of shoes and clothes, but you have to come up with a name. And the name cannot be Michael Jordan. So I stood there like trying to count to 10. It was the most ridiculous demand I've probably ever heard in my life. To give a guy a signature line without calling it by his name. And so, I don't know, maybe my anger fueled me, a little adrenaline rush. And I literally, maybe a minute, less than a minute, I said, okay, we're going to call it Air Jordan. Air because Nike's just come out with this brand new, allegedly revolutionary technology for their running shoes that's supposed to cushion your foot from the pounding on the pavement, and Air because Michael plays in the air. It was a double entendre. And, I consider myself a very creative person. I come up with a lot of ideas. They're not all good ones, but I come up with a lot of them. And immediately when I said it, he loved it. And his counterpart, Peter Moore, who was the graphic design person for Nike, sketched the first logo. That's the second logo. The first logo was wings around a basketball, like a military kind of a logo. And on the first Jordan, that was the logo. Later on, interesting, if you put that back up, put up the picture of the Jumpman, I'll tell you. Later on, in about 87, 88, Strasser wanted to take the whole Jordan program, which is still part of Nike, separate. He wanted to have a separate brand like we have today. And they took this logo. If you give me like 1 second, I'll grab something and show you.
Absolutely.
So this is Michael's if you can see this is Michael's first Nike poster.
Wow.
In Chicago, the very first poster they ever made of him. And they took that.
David, I had those pants. I had those pants in high school.
I hope they help you jump higher. He wore those. That's what he wore in the dunk contest in Chicago, interestingly enough, which caused Isaiah and Magic to freeze him out. But so they took that silhouette, and Strasser's idea, Strasser was a genius, was for basketball and athletic related clothes, that silhouette would be the logo. And for casual clothes that had nothing to do with basketball, sweaters or whatever, they were going to take the basketball off and just have the silhouette without the basketball. But as the logo became so popular, they decided to keep the basketball on. So we came up with Air Jordan. It was an instant success. And we signed the deal. And within 5 days of training camp starting, maybe 10, the NBA sees him wearing that first pair of shoes, and they banned the shoe. Strasser calls me and goes crazy. He says, God, are we effed? I said, relax. He said, David, they just banned the shoe. We making the shoe and he can't wear it. I said, Rob, you couldn't script this better.